up, Houston Texans fans? Welcome to the BullBash, a podcast of the Houston Texans fan. I'm your host, Mellow Mike. Thank you for joining me on the show today. If you can, before we get into this video, please like, subscribe, leave some comments, and I would greatly appreciate that. Now, what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to recap the NFL draft for the Houston Texans. We're going to talk about how these new draft picks are going to impact the roster. And I'm going to give you some draft grades position by position. But before we get into that, we got to talk about that 23rd overall pick. We traded that a month before the draft. And as we saw, I think it would have been more valuable in the moment as opposed to trading it a month before the draft, because teams were just coming away with an absolute killing for teams trying to trade up. And they were getting tremendous value out of trading up. When you're talking about the receiving end, they were getting a lot of compensation. And Nick Caserio talked about that. He said that teams were just wanting way too much for moving up. And the one thing that we know about Nick Caserio is he understands the value, whether it be a draft pick or a player, and getting that value in return and not giving up too much. And if Nick Caserio said that they wanted too much, I am inclined to agree with him, because Nick Caserio knows exactly what he's talking about there in that regards. So the conversations that we were having leading up to the draft, there was a lot of excitement, there was a lot of hype, and the draft didn't really live up to everything that we were talking about, because we were talking about, guys like Devondre Sweat, Byron Murphy. We were talking about, Terrion Arnold, Quinyon Mitchell, Edgar and Cooper, and all these players. And those players were gone off the board before we even got to pick 42. So I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just the fact that opposing general managers were like, yeah, we saw what Nick Caserio did last year. We ain't going to let him do that again this year. The Texans are already too good. And they're not going to give us any more ammunition. So we're going to start with the first pick that the Texans had, and that was Kamari Lassiter, cornerback from the University of Georgia. And the Texans spent a lot of time upgrading the cornerbacks room. We saw them release Steven Nelson, who was starting cornerback opposite Derek Stingley last season. And they brought in Jeff Okudah, they brought in C.J. Henderson, Mike Brown from the Cleveland Browns, and Bryant from the New England Patriots, on top of adding Kamari Lassiter in the draft. Nick Caserio did talk a little bit about Lassiter in his press conference, and he said that he's a guy that has that versatility to play inside or outside. So that gives him some options as either a starting outside cornerback opposite of Stingley, or possibly moving inside and playing slot corner. And there's going to be a lot of competition there between Okudah and Henderson for that cornerback 2 slot. Now, when you talk about Kamari Lassiter's game, and what really stood out to me, Ryan said that the physicality, the way that he plays the game, shows that he loves football. And he was talking about his ability to play press coverage, jam receivers at the line, to disrupt the timing between the receiver and the quarterback. And that is critical in the NFL. That is something that allows your pass rush a little bit of extra time to get home and come away with some more sacks. If you got guys get jam a receiver at the line, keep them from getting into those routes and into their breaks, it makes a tremendous difference. And it can disrupt a lot of passing attacks. Now, the one thing that is not going to be used to describe Kamari Lassiter's game is ball hawk. Kamari Lassiter played in 44 college games at the University of Georgia. He had 1 career interception. He's got a lot of pass deflections, but he's not coming away with a lot of interceptions. And the Texans got to work with him on that. Whether it's, you put him all summer long out there in the Texas heat in front of a jugs machine just catching balls so he gets his hands better. I don't care what you got to do, because he's going to see a lot of opportunities coming his way if he's playing opposite of Derek Stingley. Teams just ain't throwing the Stingley side of the field, period. All those passes are going to be coming opposite. So whoever's over there is going to have a lot of opportunities, especially with his pass rush that's been improved and the money invested in that defensive line in free agency. Now, Lassiter, the one thing I will say about him is, as a Kirby Smart player, he has a very high football IQ. his ability to diagnose plays on the fly and read and react is just off the charts. And he's not a track star by any means. Nick Caserio said that, a lot of teams were worried about his 40-yard dash time. Well, the Texans have made a history and let it known that they really don't pay that much attention to 40-yard dash times. They look more at game speed. And next generation stats have now given teams the ability to be able to put on the tape and see what a player's true game speed is as opposed to a 40-yard dash time. And that makes more of a difference than anything else. So if Nick Caserio says, I'm not worried about his speed, he can keep up, then that's fine by me. So all in all, when we look at this pick, it's a guy, he's physical, he can read, diagnose on the fly. He's a great open field tackler. He doesn't miss many tackles. And he can come up and he can tackle running backs one-on-one in the flat, tight ends over the middle, or guys on short passes on the outside. He puts himself in great position. There's some areas that he does need to work on. Obviously, I talked about the hands and coming away with more interceptions. But also, as a physical press corner, he uses his hands, and he's got to be careful about that in the NFL because once you get past that 5-yard, we got that 5-yard chuck rule. And NFL referees are going to throw a lot more flags on you. So you cannot get too handsy out there. He's going to have to work on being able to position himself a little bit better without having to use his hands going down the field. All in all, I would give this pick by the Texans a C+. I think it was a good pick. I think there's a little bit of refinement needed. I think there were players that were available earlier that the Texans missed out on. Cooper DeJean being one of them that would have been a better fit opposite of Stingley. But I'm not going to knock it too hard. C+, I think, is an honest grade for that. Now, the next player we're going to talk about is Blake Fisher, offensive tackle from Notre Dame. He is a right tackle. He's not a swing tackle. And Blake Fisher is the guy that they're bringing in to create competition. Nick Caserio was very, very clear about this. They're looking to create competition at positions. And right tackle is an area of need for the Houston Texans, whether we wanted to admit it or not. I can see that Houston Texans drafted a right tackle. However, I'm on board with a lot of the Texans fans saying that I did not expect the Texans to use the second-round pick to address the issue. I thought they would have went later on in the draft, like they did with Ladarius Henderson. But if this guy can give us an insurance policy if Titus Howard gets hurt, then I'm all for it. And what I've seen from him in his tape is he's great when he's out there on the move. He can locate targets while he's in motion, and he's very, very accurate at hitting a moving target. So he's going to be great on pulls, screens, and such. He's got a very powerful punch when it comes to, his jab. And he's got very, very quick feet. He's very nimble for his size. He's very, very tall. His frame, he's got some opportunity to add some more weight to that, develop a little bit more of an anchor to him. But the one thing that really, really stood out when I was watching some of the tape on him was the fact that his mechanics seem to slip play to play. There's not a lot of consistency there. And he's going to have to work on cleaning that up. Some of the things that I saw were just simple things. He has a tendency to extend his arms a little bit too far out of his frame when he's trying to punch at a pass rusher coming around the edge, and it throws him off balance because he overextends. His kick slide can have a tendency to get a little bit too wide, leaving him open to defensive ends being able to reverse it back and come inside of him. And another thing that he has had some issues with is his leverage and run blocking. He's a bigger guy, so smaller guys that could get under him, that could leverage him, and he doesn't bend that well for a big guy. That's going to be something that the Texans' offensive line has got to clean up there. Now, a lot of emphasis was placed upon the fact that over the past decade, the Houston Texans have not done a good job at all of developing offensive linemen. But with this new coaching staff, that we saw D'Amico Ryans put in. If you look at that offensive line last year, you have to give them credit. I mean, yes, they weren't the greatest in the world, but they did their job very, very well, despite having guys that were not on the active roster coming in, guys that were backups. They had like maybe one player, Shaq Mason, who started every single game consistently at right guard. Everybody else was in and out of that lineup. And they did a good job. I mean, if you look at what Jarrett Patterson did in the early portion of the season, not giving up a sacks before that leg injury, and then you saw the job that Juice Scruggs did when he came in the later part of the season at left guard, and he was honestly the best run blocker on the offensive line. They did a very good job of developing some of those players, like a Michael Dieter, who did a bang-up job at center last season, and Kendrick Green, the guy that we acquired from Pittsburgh, who was a third-round draft choice, and we got him for like a 6th or a 7th, and he was considered to be a bust in Pittsburgh. And he came in and he started showing some steady improvements in a couple of games that he played before he got injured. So this Texans offensive line, if they could stay healthy, that's going to be the key. It's going to be able to show some promise. And Fisher here, it's going to be something to be seen. Whether I don't think he's going to push Titus Howard coming off early. I think he's going to take at least a year or two to develop and to refine and get his mechanics and fundamentals down to a science where he's doing it instinctively. It's becoming more consistent from play to play, but the Texans could potentially do that, and we'll see where that goes. So for this pick, I'm going to give it I want to say a D plus, just because I think it was a bit of a reach. I think it was not really a position of need, and I think the player needs a lot of development for a 2nd round pick. So that's why I'm going to leave that. And then the next player we're going to talk about is Kalen Bullock. Kalen Bullock, if you hadn't watched his game, is safety from USC. This guy has got wheels. He is a speed team in the back part of that secondary, patrolling the middle of the field. He is a true center fielder. And this is something that the Houston Texans had a lot of trouble with last season. And to have a guy with that kind of range, with the frame and the extension that Kalen Bullock has, and the movement skills, that is something that this guy can be something in that secondary. We got to be able to get that out of him because he has the tools there to be a potential Pro Bowl, All-Pro safety in the years to come. This guy is a solid tackler. He's a playmaker, a ball hawk. He has solid sideline-to-sideline range. And he's going to be able to help our cornerbacks group. And once he gets it down and his instincts kick in and that experience starts to accumulate, there's not going to be too many teams that are going to be able to throw over the top of the field for us. I mean, he's just going to take away that deep portion of the field. And that's something that we need because we saw last year the injuries with Jimmy Ward, the struggles of veteran players like Adrian Amos. Kareem Jackson really didn't have much of an opportunity. Jalen Petrie just absolutely stunk the place up. I mean, between, missed reads and coverages, missed tackles in the open field, not making too many plays. He was a guy that really, really struggled, and hopefully that's a sophomore slump, and they get that corrected. But Kalen Bullock is a guy that I think once he gets that opportunity, I don't know if he will start right away, but they will carve out a role for him, and they will get him some reps and experience. I think that once this guy gets into that lineup full time, he ain't going to be looking back, and we're going to have somebody back there. And could be one of the first Pro Bowl, All-Pro safeties that we've had since, I think, like Tyrann Mathieu came here to Houston that one year. All in all, with this pick, I'm going to give this pick a solid B+, just because the Texans, they were aggressive in trading up for this pick. It's a great value for the pick. It's a player that has a very, very high ceiling development-wise, and it's going to be an impact player. Now, the next pick is a guy that is already becoming a fan favorite in Houston. And I'm talking about CJ Stroud's tight end from Ohio State, Kate Stover. That viral video of him out there massaging the bull, that was something that is already won over majority of Texas, if you've seen that. And then also, you had to love this pick. I mean, Sketch coming out there and hyping up the crowd. I mean, that was a great moment for the draft. He had a lot of fun doing that, and it was an enjoyable thing to watch. So, Cade Stover, though, they talked about him at length, and they really love Cade Stover. He's the guy that Nick Caserio described him as blue-collar, hard-working, hard-nosed. He was the guy that spent the last 2 years at tight end, and before that, he was playing defensive end in the Rose Bowl. He is an offensive player with a defensive mentality. And when he gets his ball in his hands out in space, this guy is like a bull in the china shop. He's not shying away from contact. He'll run people over. He's physical. But he's also got the ability to get open down the field. So this is one of those spots where we're going to have to talk about the ramifications of Cade Stover coming in, because automatically we assume that the Texans are going to be turning loose of Tegan Quadriano. I mean, he's been on that roster and he's been injury prone and hasn't really gotten a chance to show anything. And the Texans, they didn't draft him. This was a Bill O'Brien pick, I believe. So they're not going to have too much of a second thought moving on from Tegan. But another one is Brevin Jordan. And this is going to be a position that we're going to watch intently, because this is going to be a great position battle coming up through training camp and preseason, getting ready for the regular season for that tight end 2 position. And my hope is that we can see a lot more 2 tight end formations going forward. Now, Brevin Jordan, he hasn't really been able to put it together for a complete season. He's had opportunities to be a starting player, and he wasn't able to win that starting job from Jordan Akins for the past couple of seasons and Pep Hamilton's offense. And I really don't know whether it's just due to the fact that Bill O'Brien and Pep Hamilton just really didn't have that ability to feature the tight ends as much as Bobby Slowick potentially does with the way that he used Dalton Schultz last year. And we saw the big play from Brevin Jordan, and that was a flash that we've been looking for. We haven't seen too much in terms of that. But Cade Stover, if he could show some consistency, and that one area that they're going to be looking for is if he could bring that physicality to that edge in a run blocking and seal that edge and create a little bit of space for those running backs on the outside zone plays, he could potentially lock down that tight end 2 position by the end of, the preseason. So that's something that we're going to have to watch, because it's going to impact as to whether we decide to bring Brevin Jordan back when his contract is up. All in all, this pick right here, I'm going to give this pick a probably a B- there in terms of the potential that he has to be unlocked. It was a great fit there. He's not the greatest specimen that I've ever seen, but he's far from it. And he's a guy that is ready to play right now coming in and has the potential to make an impact. Now, the next player we're talking about is Jamal Hill. And he's the linebacker that we got. And mainly, I see him as being a guy that his impact is going to be on special teams. And he was a hybrid linebacker. He was too slow to play safety. He was too small for a linebacker. He was kind of that Mark Barron type player without the speed. So I think his primary calling is going to be on special teams, reserve linebacker, and such. If he's even on the active roster, he has more if he doesn't make it on special teams, he's probably one of those guys that they try to stash away on the practice squad. So I really don't think there's going to be too much for that going there. Now, the next player is the guy that Texas fans are talking about. They're already nicknamed him Jaws, and that's Jawar Jordan, running back for Louisville. And this is a guy who's he's a jitterbug. He's a scatback type. He's very, very small stature. He's got a lot of speed, explosiveness. His value is primarily going to be third down situations, receiver out of the backfield, and he also has a lot of experience in the return games, special teams, punt returns, kickoff returns. So he's definitely going to come in there. He's going to compete with Damian Pierce and Steven Sims in the return game, and he's probably going to get some touches when it comes to third down if they have to pull Joe Mixon out of the game, give him a breather as such. Damian Pierce isn't really a receiving threat out of the backfield. And this guy here, he's got the juice and he's got the wheels. So he's definitely going to make that active roster. We don't have too many running backs other than bringing back Daria Gumbawali. And Daria is he's not a guy that's going to be too high in that rotation. I could see Jordan coming in here, and by the time training camp is over with, he's already going to be at the running back 3. And if we don't see Damian Pierce get things turned around, then he potentially has the value to go up to a running back 2. So that's going to be something that bears watching. And the next one is Solomon Byrd. He's a defensive end from USC. And D'Amico Ryans really talked about him and loving the way that he is aggressive off that edge, the way that he gets after the quarterback. He has that swarm mentality already. And when you look at him on tape, you know, he got that Jonathan Grenard type build already. So this guy that potentially, if he doesn't make the active roster, they're definitely going to stash him away on that practice squad. They're going to develop him, and he could develop into, early off, I see him as a rotational pass rusher, and as somebody later on that could eventually down the road develop into a starter. Next one, we got Marcus Harris, defensive tackle of Auburn, and this guy is he's a short, squat powder keg, man. He is just very, very good at using that leverage to get under guys with his frame and his stature, and he's very good at penetrating gaps. He's primarily a run defender, so there is some value for him if he is to make this squad as a run defender and just getting into a rotation on early downs, coming in as, you know, possibly a 2-down run defender. And they're going to work with him at developing somewhat of a pass rush, getting him some more moves. And he's somebody that, you know, potentially could develop into something. But early off, I see him more, if he makes the active roster, he's going to be a guy that's early down run defender. And probably just a third defensive tackle on goal line situations. And now we get to the last pick of the draft, which was Ladarius Henderson, offensive tackle from Michigan. This guy plays primarily on the left side. He's played 20 snaps or 20 games at left tackle for Michigan. And before that, I think he played 19 games, if I'm not mistaken, for Arizona State University at left guard. He's about 6'4", so I think he projects more as a guard than he does as a tackle, but he does have that potential and a pinch if there's injuries and the left side gets decimated that he can kick out the left tackle if we need him to be. This guy that left guard's kind of a crowded room right now. And we got Kendrick Green, we got Kenyon Green, we got the potential of Juice Scruggs there, and potentially one of those guys, either Kendrick or Kenyon Green, could kick over to right guard, and this guy could make the active roster there. But all in all, I say For this draft, I would probably give them a solid C. I'm not going to rave about too much of this. They got a couple good players in Kalen Bullock and Cade Stover, and a lot of players at just really smaller, more contributors, death bills, and everything like that. So, not too much. And, looking at this roster going forward, we got some players that are going to be on the bubble. I think when you look at Kamara Lassard coming in there, there's a potential that we could potentially see if Kalen Bullock takes over at starting safety and they push Jimmy Ward in there. Then there's a possibility that, we could see Desmond King released again. D'Angelo Ross is going to have competition. He's a guy that could be released. One of the two, if Kamari Lassiter starts to work out between C.J. Henderson and Jeff Okudah, could potentially be cut candidates. So there's that. In the secondary, the only player that I see being a cut candidate right now would be Lonnie Johnson Jr. at the safety position. If Kalen Bullock's anything close to what we think he's going to be. We talked about Tegan Quadriano being the cut candidate at tight end. Marcus Harris works out. I think you could see potentially maybe a Tim Settle or I think it would probably be Tim Settle that would be out at defensive tackle. And everybody else, I think, pretty much for the most part, is going to fill a spot and not really put anybody else out of a job. So, let me know what you guys think. How did you feel about the draft picks, and everything that went into that? Were you disappointed, or was there a certain player that you're excited about? I mean, I've got mixed feelings. It's a mixed bag for me, but I'm really looking forward to seeing Kalen Bullock and Cade Stover. Those are probably my two favorite players coming out of this year's draft, and a couple of players that I'm looking forward to see. Thank you guys, and have a great day.